Welcome to our webinar series, The Real Risk is in Action, How AI is Reshaping Resilience in Energy. Today we'll explore how AI is reshaping resilience across industries, but especially in energy. I'm joined today by two esteemed colleagues. First, allow me to introduce Anup Sharma, founder and CEO of Ace and Apps, with more than 25 years of leadership in digital strategy, technology, and operations at some of the world's largest industrial and chemical companies. Anup now runs his own advisory firm, helping organizations unlock business value through data, cybersecurity, and technology-enabled transformation. Welcome, Anup.
Thank you, Steve. You actually gave me 5 years back. It's like 30 plus years, but I appreciate it.
Okay.
I like it.
Great, thanks. My other guest today is Al Lindseth, principal at CI50 Advisory Services. Like Anup, after more than 2 decades in industry in the energy sector, Al founded his advisory firm to help organizations capture more value from rapid technological change, combining experience in risk management, technology enablement, change management, and cybersecurity, as well as analytics to deliver fast, impactful results. Welcome, Al.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Look forward to this with you, Anup, and thanks everybody for attending today.
Excellent. So to set the stage, I'm going to ask each of you to share a bit about your backgrounds and current areas of focus in your practices. Anup, if it's okay, I'll start with you.
Oh, sure, Steve. Thank you, and thanks everybody from joining around the world. I started my career with a company called General Electric, 26 years, mostly in heavy industry, power generation, so gas, steam, nuclear. And then my formative years were really in oil and gas. It was the boom. And I had the privilege of learning and working under 4 different chairmen at GE, where the focus was infrastructure growth around the world. And then 5 years, almost 5 years in one of the largest chemicals and plastics companies, and most recently in a global EPC firm. And I have to say, after 32 years, my learning has just been reset and it's starting over. You think about the significant technology changes, the dependence of, there are a lot of pundits who said we had reached peak oil and peak gas 10 years ago. If you look at the trajectory of energy security, economic security, of course, AI, but the world, about 1 billion people in the world we live in today have access to electricity when you flip a switch, clean water, healthcare. There are 8 billion human beings that still don't have that. And I think that's really our opportunity. When I think about the tremendous innovation that has allowed, I see a offshore platform, Steve, in the background. Mm-hmm. Right? That is an engineering marvel. Now think about the ability to drive efficiency, do very strategic investments to tackle climate change. But the world needs clean energy. The world needs to unlock the capabilities of human beings. And that's what I'm most excited about, right? We have this incredible foundation. We live in a country where innovation and transformation is possible. And the AI revolution has just started. So I'm excited about the opportunity. I'm excited to learn from you and Al today. And we'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks, Anup. Looking forward to it. Al, maybe you could share a bit about your background and focus on maybe the broader business and the AI landscapes you're seeing and setting the stage that led us here today.
For sure. Well, I really look forward to today. This is going to be a lot of fun. So I was with a company called Plains All American for 22 years, Fortune 100 midstream company. Before that, I was a consultant with PwC. I got involved with Plains because they were small and they grew very fast and ended up with some issues. And so I kind of came in as the fix-it guy. And I jumped around, started with risk because they had kind of a rogue unauthorized trading incident. Got splashed over the headlines, and I was focused on that. And then I moved around to different areas. They tripled in size overnight, and so accounting, IT, that developed into cyber, a number of different areas. Ended up going to work for them. Was there for 22 years. Ultimately, was wearing 3 hats. 3 main hats, the risk officer hat over the business risk, and then the CIO had over IT and technology, and the CISO had. I had a big focus on cybersecurity. I was also a big tech investor the whole time. I was not only a practitioner, but a big investor. I was investing in AI well over a decade ago. So I had a front row seat when everything hit, and you just had this explosion in innovation in 2020. And then I just really wanted to be a part of it. And so I went to him. It was a great run. We became a Fortune 100 company, grew, just had a fantastic time there, and said, listen, guys, I want to be kind of doing my own thing here. So I've been doing that for 3.5 years. It's pure advisory. I've got no employees. My days of having hundreds of employees are done. It's just me filling my dance card. And I focus a lot on modern innovation. I just got a belief that we're really a lagging market, but the attackers aren't. The foreign nationals aren't. A small subset of companies that are going to disrupt their competition aren't. And so I'm really always pushing the Houston, the Texas market, to and then others that I work with to be more innovative. And I have a kind of a different way of looking at innovation because we've seen this explosion, and you can solve problems you could never solve before, and somebody's going to, either the person attacking you or your competitor that's trying to disrupt you. And so, I try to get over the cultural challenges, the technological challenges, and kind of push some of these companies to take a larger subset of what they do now and innovate more. And as a result, I work with a lot of startups. I work with a lot of tech firms. I advise them as well as I advise the operators. On the operator side, I'm advising a lot on how to speed up adoption, how to do it effectively, which is kind of a win-win for both sides.
Great. Well, we're going to get into a lot of healthy discussion, I think. Building on that, Anup, how do you explain autonomy and agentic AI in ways that executive leaderships really get? What resonates there?
There's some good news here, Steve, because over the last 3 years, I mean, I think generative AI was happening in the background, and then there was a big review, right? Just today, Sam Altman and Elon Musk are engaging very publicly. You see used in application, Apple Intelligence, Google. Actually, CEOs have a very good way to understand and articulate the use of generative AI and agentic AI. I think the challenge perhaps that I've witnessed in the last 18 to 24 months is generative AI captured the imagination of almost everybody, and then as predictable, and Al would agree, everybody said, oh, this is the best new thing. We're going to go do pilots, we're going to invest. People are selling you GPUs, you're reading articles, and all of a sudden, every company has lots of pilots. Well, 95% of companies have admitted that their pilots don't scale. It's really hard to see value from the initial investment. I think that I'd say, Steve, before I jump into how do you explain it in simple language, two things happened in the last 18 months. Physics-based AI and the rapid capability expansion of simulation. So for those of us that grew up in the industrial world, we've been using AI for a long time. I mean, I remember the codes and methods for nuclear fleet, whether it's military or US, is in Fortran. We've used AI and ML for a long time. It's just the ability to scale. So I think that's one. Real-time simulation and physics-based AI kind of blew the doors of traditional ways of using AI and digital twins in the industrial sector. The second thing is really around the use of agents. An agent comes from the word agency. So something that was not trained on historical data now has the ability, has reasoning capability to now be intelligent. I think if you think about boardrooms, and I was part of a tremendous two companies, of course, GE sort of invented the space of the industrial internet, perhaps a bit too early, but both Lyndell and Worley were leaders in adoption of this capability. It was always about, it's interesting, but is there a return? So is there a return on investment at scale? So you always have to do pilots, you have to demonstrate. But I think the successful companies are those that really scale the technology and the operation. I think the second perhaps more difficult thing is reimagining your business model. Because I think this technology has the ability for human beings to converse. I mean, we've all used SAP, name any technology, the user interface is complicated. That's why you get to 10, 20, 30% adoption. But you think about a workforce of 100,000 people or 500 people or 50 people. Imagine the technology that allows you to converse with an asset. A refinery could tell. So all of a sudden, the threshold of getting value changes. But I think probably the thing most people are not thinking about yet is the humans have to really unleash the capability of this technology. So I'd say most people understand it. The way I would recommend people listening is don't overcomplicate it. It's interesting for cocktail discussions. There are very many smart people who are getting paid a lot of money to make the technology better. Translating it into economic value is usually a good place to start with your CFO, board, and CEO. But more importantly, we talk a lot about human factors. Human intelligence, could you remove 60, 70% of non-value added tasks in your company? If you do that, there is nothing you cannot drive, right? In terms of competitive advantage, innovation. So that's how I think about translating these very complicated things into simple business terms. But I think let's not forget the human factor here. So
Great. Yeah, I would add, there's a saying and it's a quote, and I think it's been attributed to Da Vinci, but I don't know how they could prove that. The height of sophistication is simplicity, right?
like that.
That's
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah.
Keeping things simple. I think this gives enterprises and organizations a real opportunity to reimagine how they get their work done.
That's right.
So excellent. Al, I'm going to shift over to you. We're gonna start talking about risk and governance and things in that space. As we look at risk management, cyber, overall governance, what are the most significant and often overlooked risks that you're seeing as AI becomes more operational in the energy sector?
Yeah. So first, they have to have kind of a methodology that's common across the management team, or that they can sync up on how they look at risk, right? So that's often kind of step one. And unfortunately, with AI, we've got a lot of guidelines, but we don't have established methodologies for measuring, identifying risk that are accepted across the spectrum, like we do with cyber and with other ones, where you can grab 4 or 5 of them, depending on the flavor and the crowd there. So, you have to kind of work with the management team a little bit to get everybody on the same page there. And I work through risk planning questions. One of them is kind of the trajectory and, getting a common understanding around the different types of AI, kind of when they've come on the scene, the speed, the pace, how Gen AI differs, from agentic AI, and some of that's storytelling. Uh, but like, for example, I had one client where we kind of sketched out a model around risk measurement. It was almost kind of a scoring mechanism, where it was a function of kind of autonomy, exposure, impact. If you think about those, we just had them multiplied by each other, and then subtracting controls, the effect that you have offsets there. And then we had a function that could be plus or minus, which was just external pressures, and we kind of went through the different use cases and looked at that. And that was right for them, and then you're kind of handing it back to them, and they're taking it and they're tweaking it. It's more about getting it moving, and you can adapt that as you get comfortable over time. But I've worked through this process with a number of firms, and usually kind of a short engagement advisor, and you're trying to management spending. They've all heard different things about AI. They've all got their own ideas. So it's really important to get everybody centered around kind of, I use the risk planning questions and some of these key concepts. But when I've done that, 90% of the time, two things rise to the top in terms of obstacles, big risks, cybersecurity readiness. A lot of companies are trying to handle this with blocking, with policies to enforce individual accountability, as opposed to developing capabilities to see where people are accessing AI and really at different levels, right? At the application level, at the person level, at the data level. And, you're really, the tools are becoming more sophisticated to do that now, but, for a little while, you're really kind of talking about zero trust type capabilities. And it's really important to do that because if you think about the defense in depth, the four goals of a cyber program, if you're
Mm.
putting all your effort on blocking, where you're going to be playing whack-a-mole, because anybody that wants capital is going to have AI as a part of their business strategy and their architecture, and individual accountability forcing, that's good. You want to do that with policies, centers of excellence. But people are flawed, and everybody feels compelled to use these tools to see if it makes them better at their job. And so you're really flying blind if you don't start developing those capabilities that are needed. So, and then data readiness is the second one. That's been a huge deal just in terms of the state of the data. And then when we're talking, because we're talking energy today, what you're doing at the edge and the capability there is really important. Segmentation, not having transparency, not being able to get data back and forth in a secure manner is a real problem with, leveraging off of that operating data for AI or for other types of uses. And we see companies going both ways. And the governance, is huge, right? You got to be able to trust these tools to be able to use them. And so there you get into, one end of the spectrum, humans in the loop, and then, other end of the spectrum, just resistance change and general cultural attributes.
Got it. How is that cybersecurity conversation evolving? I mean, cyber is not new, right? We've had, the imperative across industries for years. Bad actors are out there. You've got to run faster than they are. As AI and especially technologies like Gen AI start to touch not only IT but OT, how do those conversations now evolve? What are the imperatives today that weren't there 5 years ago or even 5 months ago?
Yeah.
Yes.
So as part of the risk planning question exercise, I'll talk trajectory, and it kind of depends on the type of risk, right? If you're talking OT or you're talking IT cyber or cloud or the AI, and then I get into goals. And so to kind of illustrate or answer your question a little bit, I like to use defense in depth. It's just a really simple
Mm-hmm.
illustration of the goals of a cyber program. You've got four of them. You're trying to, prevent an attack, detect as quickly as possible, respond as effectively as you can, and then get ahead of it, predict, right? Which is a focus. And when I think about the evolution, and I'll storytell a little bit the boards and management teams, just so it's an easy, sticky way for them to remember this. I'll kind of give the cliff notes of the IT cyber, and that, okay, decades ago, we were trying to prevent, right, the moat or the wall around the castle, and then the bad guys got better, and then you're trying to detect, and then you got foreign nationals, can't keep them out, trying to respond. It's about resiliency, and now everybody's trying to get ahead. And you can take that and you can overlay different waves, right? So with OT, where a lot of companies are right now is still prevent. So if
Mm-hmm.
you're talking to a management team and you've just kind of described what's happened in IT cyber for decades, and then they're sitting there, just segmenting and protecting, and they have no visibility into their OT environment. They don't know what they have, so they can't protect it. They're up there in prevent. They can't detect because they don't have visibility. They can't respond because they can't detect, and they certainly aren't getting ahead of anything. So that lights a fire. Right. Yeah, or it should, right? What does it take to do that? It takes money, it takes attention, we've got to move on this thing. We're catching up. And that's really until black energy in Ukraine, the strategy was really just prevent on OT with 90% of firms. It wasn't to develop as much visibility in those environments. And then, like I described AI, kind of where a lot of companies are with AI, they're still looking at policies, they're still trying to block. They're not developing those sophisticated capabilities. So when you take OT, or energy and AI and combine them together, we're not in a great situation, especially when you look at data readiness and cyber capabilities. With one still on prevent and the other one, possibly having none of the four, goals if they're not developing the capabilities. So I think there's a real reset that's needed here for a
Hmm.
lot of companies. A small subset are taking the right steps, but largely I see a lot of them moving into it too quickly without really considering a lot of this.
Well, I just add, Al, to what you said. The last 6 months in our boardroom, there was a significant escalation of risk. And board members are quite tuned into critical infrastructure security. And I think the use of deep fake and capabilities, very public use of those things.
Yeah.
It just overwhelms an organization using traditional cyber tools, right? So I think agentic AI and the propagation and then nation state activity over the last 3 years, and the top three certainly use this capability at scale. I'd say the other thing that happened is the better understanding of the supply chain effect of risk. Supply chain of IT companies, very public things that have happened where things you took for granted, right? Al, to your point, has now changed. And I think the directive, and I use that word, the directive from the board is to have a dramatically different approach, and they're very curious. They're helpful. I think they also encourage kind of this coalition mindset with the government. You can remember, Al, in the days of pre-Columbia Pipeline, how insulated we were. You'd get the lawyers involved. Now there's a lot more open reporting, sharing of information, almost this open source of intelligence. But then you could spend every dollar you make on cybersecurity and still not be secure, right? So how do you
Yeah.
take it from a grudge spend to really an integrated capability for business value and risk? I think, Al, is the point you are making to many leadership teams and boards. And I think that this audience we're speaking to plays a big role, right? Because if you can have the capability to secure and drive, our IT and technology teams know a lot about end-to-end processes, then it's not just about a risk grudge spend, but it's really about a capability. Then you can now think about optimizing, driving growth, and it's the same data set, right? It's the same supply chain of partners. How do you drive more value from the investment that perhaps a year or two ago was just, it's like building fences around your plant. Is it going to add to your productivity to drive value in the product? Maybe or maybe not, right? So, anyways.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point. And a lot of what drives me a little crazy is these efforts are very complicated and there's a lot to them, but there are so many companies where they're dragging along, and really any transformative, significantly transformative effort for all the wrong reasons that are extremely solvable. And things like resistance to change and approaching it like an IT project and leapfrogging all the upstream dependencies like culture and people and letting that interfere. So I came into technology as a risk manager, just because I was already a risk manager, and so naturally a risk manager is going to just list out the reasons, the largest risk, and they're going to go after the ones at the top. It's just if they ignore it, you end up with a trading loss or something like that. So they have to, and if leadership and behavior and those things are at the top, you go after them. And what often happens in a lot of these projects is you've got IT saying, I'm going to take on these responsibilities, and then my business partner is going to take on these responsibilities, and we're going to work together. And a lot of times you're getting to that area because you haven't automated that. So the business partner may be part of the problem. I mean, but you get this weird kind of area where you're not dealing with the issues at the top. And a lot of times those end up being low-hanging fruit if you're just willing to deal with it, and be a change agent.
Got it. Anup, you mentioned something just a few minutes back, supply chain and volatility. Let's go a little deeper into that. With the current geopolitical and macroeconomic uncertainties that you could just pull from every headline off of every screen every morning, where do you see the biggest opportunities to reduce decision latency with AI, and particularly in the context of supply chain, project delay, safety, those sorts of things?
It's a great question. I think, the energy industry, look, capital investment is the lifeblood for any industry. You're seeing a dramatic, actually almost an unfair share of capital going to data center build, for example, right?
Mm.
If you look at the lifeblood of any industry, and we're used to, I mean, Al and I come out of oil and gas, you look at infrastructure, I mean, just mining chemicals and resources, chemicals, and energy is going to see a dramatic increase in infusion of capital dollars, right? Because of all the factors that we've talked about already. Somewhere between, if you include the data center spend, $7 to $10 trillion a year. Now, it doesn't certainly feel that way if you're in those companies today because there's a contraction. And it's because there are other places that are more promising with a return. Look, investors are smart, right? And so I think there are a couple of things. Capital project execution has not fundamentally changed, Steve, for the last 40 years in our industry. It's hard work. Look, I mean, physics, you can't defeat physics. I mean, if you have a refinery, if you're running an LNG plant, you're any type of thing, you need certainty, right? There's technology that allows you, which if you came out of the high tech industry, automotive, they have done things that would feel like a tremendous innovation in the energy, oil and gas resources space. But, I look at the mining industry, autonomous mining has had a massive amount of investment and a lot of success. The challenge is you cannot take that and put it in a new mine, right? It was all customized. So I think um, having the North Star to be getting to a few things, final investment decision, right? Attracting capital so that you have certainty of design, schedule, cost. If we all got our heads around that, and it's a very fractured value chain, lots of data definitions. People are doing risk transference, the money people, the operators, the EPCs, the suppliers, they're all transferring risk to each other. But when you really think about it and step back and say, okay, if we took a look at this value chain and if our combined objective was getting to final investment decision that allows the investors to feel better about their investment. And then I think, of course, design, but I think construction. If you look at the highest risk in any project, it's the construction phase. You have many human beings involved. You have lots of parts and things. You have to pull it all together. And usually in the last 6 to 12 months of construction and commissioning is where the biggest amount of waste is. So I think and eventually you'll get the first gas, first oil, and then, these things are going to operate for a long time. So I think if we kind of just in the near term, my recommendation through lots of scars on my back and projects is always about can we get investors the confidence? So let's all get focused on that final investment decision because capital is going other places if we cannot be the right place to invest. And then I think if we get really focused on worker safety, improvement of construction, visibility to materials, and I think, look, any company that is is getting sort of put through the motions of tariffs and supply risk. I mean, this is where the data machine can be really harvested, right? I mean, this is where you could take a lot of non-value added work out of people's lives. There's just not enough construction workers, engineers, trades to kind of do that amount of work, right? And so that would be my hypothesis from the context of my experience in the last decade, Steve.
So
Good.
Steve, I deal a lot in supply chain risk. That's been a big focus of mine for last 3 years or so. It's an interesting area. So during COVID, it was number one priority with CEOs, right? Just because of all the issues. The whole world, as we knew it, kind of flipped on its head, right? You'd always had just in time, keep, capital low, and yeah, and not have big inventories, and all this sudden, everything kind of flipped, right? And now we've got tariffs. But if you kind of break it down into like the data situation, the application situation, and the supply chain risk, the traditional supply chain systems, were the data is very transactional, didn't deal a lot with risk. It was all over in different systems. And you had to kind of, if you want a risk view, you had to cobble it together. That was often happening in spreadsheets in between these systems. And then if you think about the, supply chain itself, a lot of companies really had kind of more of a handle around tier one. And supply chain groups would keep their direct costs low and they try to attack as much spend as possible but with as few people and as little contract focus as they could, and have metrics like we're delivering 13, 15 times, and they like that. The heads of supply chain like that. Management around them like that. Um, but a lot of time they weren't getting to all the tier two, and their suppliers, and now there's an expectation that you're able to kind of handle all that, and so it's a massive ecosystem. A lot of these groups, as they were built, weren't able to get to, and for typical auto supplier, maybe there's 250, tier one and 20,000 tier two, right? And then they're out of your direct line of sight too, and your direct control for sure. So that's had huge implications with cyber, but it's had massive implications with all supply chain business aspects as they've developed. Certainly, from the supply to the more demand oriented or transportational legal mechanism issues to tariffs to so there's new innovation out there, and AI has been a game changer throughout all of it, that really where you almost look at supply chain. You have capabilities like scenario analysis, contingency planning that are kind of more built out, and the data itself has gotten a lot better. You think about weather data with buoys, or you think about default potential data. The quality is a lot higher, but it's more like you're looking at health like metrics where you're covering a larger ecosystem, and a lot more is coming into these modular, kind of applications, all cloud-based, of course. And you're looking for the blip, right? Like if you had a heart monitor or something, then you dig down more into it, because you're covering a lot more than you could before. And I've worked with some of these companies, and you've seen some of those startups have developed more like a company like Anup was with, like GE, where you're really going deep into the supply chain, and that's the risk. It's more on the business side. Some of these other ones have developed more in, let's say, banking, around reputational risk or money laundering, or more compliance oriented. But it's a really interesting mix of capabilities that are out there to allow companies to manage this. And it's all been AI. AI is the big game changer on all this that's enabled it.
Great. Let's shift gears here. So AI, pilot, test it, there's support for it, there's investment in it. It may or may not be terribly coordinated yet across the enterprise. There's sort of maybe a cottage industry that's focusing it in this division, and maybe this department over here is testing some capabilities. Talk about scale. What keeps most organizations, Al, stuck in that pilot and test phase as opposed to making a realistic, scalable move to improve their operation?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of companies, this is very transformational for one thing. And a lot of companies say that they're going through transformational efforts, but they're actually not acting like it. Like if you were to kind of scope out, or you got transformational, and then you've got, we're doing cost cutting, or we're tweaking things or processes. We don't want to change things too much. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you do have transformational. So a lot of it's, like I say it's low hanging fruit, but it's very difficult to overcome some of this, more the cultural behavioral aspects that are not allowing these companies to take the right architectural steps. Either they try to break down the complexity and just make it super simple, or they're allowing people to kind of sabotage the efforts, because there's a subset of the population that wants things the way that they are right now, right? And so you end up having to kind of plot the path to, who are the resistors? What's the big opportunity? I think a lot of the big opportunity here is around decision latency, and speed. We've had, all these advances, right? Sensors have gotten cheaper, and connectivity's gotten better, and we've got digital twins. We can model more and simulate more, and we've got Pi and dashboards and energy that have allowed us to use more real-time data. But it's all still alerting. It's all data that's coming to people, and then people wait, right? We wait for meetings. We wait for other people to make decisions. We wait to analyze. And so, decision latency is really the issue right now. But I think so. I'd say find the pilots around decision latency or whatever those use cases are really important to you. And then think about the things that are the cyber readiness, the capabilities, put the right governance in place, make sure they're cross-functional teams, and then start smaller and scale up. But then you need to be architecturally building and researching for what it's going to take to scale this. And that's really important. And if you're allowing the resistance change to break this down or overcomplicate it, or you're not dealing with possibly some leadership issues in some cases, like I'll come in and just kind of tell it like it is sometimes in some of these short meetings. And I may not get invited back, but I get really good feedback from the people that were in the meetings that now, they can't all unknow things that have been known in the meeting. And so it's moving forward, but I made somebody mad. And so I'm not necessarily invited back. I count that as a win. And you have to kind of go into it with that attitude because
Sure.
a lot of these are people problems that are
Yeah.
slowing things up.
It's interesting, an often overlooked aspect of, automation, and, we're in an automation revolution, and it's talent, and it's the people side of it. How, and I'll pose this to both of you, maybe Anup, you could give me your thoughts. How is AI reshaping the ways organizations need to think about talent and the construct of an organization at its core? What roles, even mindsets, are becoming essential now?
Look, I think that's something where we should spend a significant amount of time as leadership teams. But let me go back to just your previous question because I think there's a tie.
Sure.
I'd say it's quite simple in my mind. See, new technology comes along and it just becomes a good distraction. But now, today, if you're a public company, private company, non-linear cost out is your objective, right? I
Mm.
mean, just think about a tariff or tax, 10%, 15% is expected. Now, if you were trying to do that before AI or Gen AI, you would get the benefit of 3 years of an ERP, 18 months of a data warehouse. So your time to value from an investment was quite long. I think I'd
Mm.
say CIO teams, technology teams, you have so much capability that you don't even need to go to ask for the investment. Just think about non-linear cost out in your world, right? So hyper automation of tasks that are, just if you think about your SOC or operations, and many companies are doing that. So I think you almost have to start with, I always view value in three horizons. Steve, I think we've talked about this. In 90 days, there are only four 90-day quarters. It's like playing the Super Bowl. You got two quarters. Well, you got four. And in 90 days, you should show a dramatic return on investment. That takes care of your scaling pilot problem, right? And then I'm with Al, focus on 2 to 3 things that really drive your business. It could be
Mm.
understanding the demand signal. It could be dramatically changing the cost of supply chain or something that the COO or a general manager in the business shows a dramatic ability to scale across. And then the final goal is really about business model innovation, right? So if you are not thinking about it in those three, and frankly, you don't need that much investment for the first two. It's just tied to the business goals. You need a sponsor, and I think focus. So, but the only way you drive business model transformation is through your workforce. And unfortunately, not like unlike other technologies. I'm sure the first time somebody said, taking a malaria vaccine would be a good idea, there were a lot of people who said we shouldn't take it, right? Sorry for that analogy, but so you think about there's a lot of fear around AI in organizations. Most people have done a disservice by saying it's going to replace humans. Well, maybe it will in some non-value added industries, but I think, look, 70% of the workforce by 2030 will be my children and Al's children, right? Digital natives. They do not want to work at a place where they don't have the capability at their fingertips, information. So you're talking about the next generation who are very curious, they're purpose driven. If your competitive advantage is to bring that talent in, it behooves you to start to really think about an integrated set of capabilities that can unleash the power of this technology, right? And I think um, the good news is by doing a few simple things. I mean, like if you just took some lean concepts to say our objective for this new generation is ask questions about why do we do certain things a certain way. I mean, why
Mm.
is it that in an 8 hour shift, 7 hours are spent not doing actual work, right? Because it's non-value added. If you just focus on that, you would create a welcoming environment, an environment and a culture where you could take risk, you could drive to the purpose of the company, not mind-numbing work, right? So I just think we've
Mm.
gotten it wrong when it comes to AI. I mean, who knows? Maybe there'll be a sentient, maybe there'll be a the somebody's going to take over the world, maybe, maybe not. But you know what? Humans are needed, unleashing the innovation of humans and just getting them to know that you're not out there to replace them to make money or do whatever you do, I think will engender a lot of what Al talked about, culture, creating an environment where people don't fear this capability. I mean, if I was coming in to do invoicing and I was able to eliminate 90% of donkey work by creating agents that I know would help. I mean, think about the competitive advantage if you start to scale that concept. The network effect of that is tremendous. So, look, that to me is the challenge of leadership teams is, are you doing enough to attract the next tranche of talent? But are you doing enough to make sure that your current employee base that is across all age groups is not fearful that your objective is to replace them? Right? It should be
Exactly.
for their betterment. Does that make sense? I mean, that's sort of my view. I'm sure Al and you probably have
Absolutely.
a better answer to that.
Yeah. So yeah, just listening to you, and it was making me think about a lot of different things. So I'll just touch on a couple of them. I think that you have to look at this as different from past technology advances. Uh, other ones made us more efficient, right? And automated things like if you have writing, manual writing, then you have typewriter, and then you have the computer, and speeds things up. But the basic process doesn't change, right? Or horses to horsepower to I mean, you give lots of different examples, and AI is different, right? It sees things that we don't see. It sees patterns we don't see, identifies, makes recommendations, can even do work, right? As we move from agentic and then into autonomous. And so it's really kind of it's augments our performance. Now, companies are, I mean, there are going to be lost jobs. But and it's, I've got a young son who just got a job. He just came out of college. It's a little bit of a tough market out there right now. But to Anup's point, for the person that gets the job, like they want to be in a place that's leveraging AI. Like if they're going to be working on, a various system, they want to be, in beta, moving, leveraging off of that system's AI, not staying back and letting everybody else move forward, for the employees that are hired, right? So there's going to be disruption. There's definitely going to be disruption. There'll be opportunities created like there have been with other tech waves.
Right.
And there will be, reskilling needed, and there will be job reductions. And I think, a lot of company CEOs have come out very visibly and said we're not going to need as many jobs, especially some of the entry level jobs. So there's going to be a rebalancing here for sure. Uh, when I think about what I think is going to happen over the next 5 years, I think we're going to see kind of a redefinition of what is high value talent. And
Mm.
Anoop mentioned a few of the things that I think you're going to be looking at. I think there are going to be things like curiosity, like somebody really probing and challenging. What sort of questions are they asking? Uh, are they blindly trusting these models? Collaboration is going to be huge between these different groups. That brings into it change leadership, uh, and overcoming resistance to change. With transformative projects, a lot of companies go through, I mentioned this before, like it's an IT project. And what happens when you assign a project manager to IT project? They create discovery workshops, they bring everybody into the same room. Well, if they're threatened by change, they're going to focus on their differences. And how many of us have been in
Mm.
these meetings where the whole effort gets sabotaged just because of how they begun? So it requires skill sets to move through and get the confidence of other groups and show them what you're trying to accomplish and get everybody on board. And, leadership and being a true change agent, is going to be very important in that. and then getting others behind you. So I think that you're going to see a little bit of a redefinition. We're already seeing some new roles. Like I don't think it's the world where we're just hiring data scientists and and AI engineers. I think you're really seeing prompt engineers. You're seeing, I saw a human in the loop strategist title the other day. I thought that was
There you
really, I've
go.
only seen one of those. That was very recent. But they are different skill sets, especially as you get into agentic and potentially autonomous. There now the models become very different. For large language models, there's not, they're not quite as different. But when you're really getting into agentic, there is a big difference in the models and what you're trying to do and the business acumen that's required and to leverage off of this to oversee it, especially if you get into autonomous. So I think there you're starting to see some different skill sets and how are you going to get value out of the whole thing
Great.
is at the top of it.
That's great. I think we've got some time here to take some questions, but we've covered quite a lot. I mean, just to recap, from evolving business models, risk, governance, nimbleness, scaling AI. I think the underlying theme that I've heard throughout the discussion today is what's important is acting now, not waiting. Time for evaluation sort of is back there, right? Action for the sake of moving isn't enough anymore, right? Business value has got to be realized, and it's got to be realized quickly. To your point, Anup, you got these 90-day cycles that there's got to be something meaningful for the investors in the company, to see the value. So with that recap, I think I'm going to press the pause button and see what questions we've got from our listeners.
Absolutely. So we have a few questions coming through chat, and one of them is, in the spirit of don't reinvent the wheel, what guiding principles do you use to determine which capabilities stay on premises and which data is safe and valuable to share with an AI platform outside?
I can jump on that if
Yeah,
you
go ahead.
want. So I think that one part of that is the cyber aspect, and you have to determine the strength of the controls of the company that you're dealing with. And so I work with different startups, and I worked with an agentic AI firm this last February who works in identity and access management, a very sensitive area. And I worked up a little card for him, basically that said, here are all the things that you're going to have in place, to get companies comfortable and to use you in this sensitive area. And it's not just SOC type 2. I mean, it is an extensive list. We do adversarial testing. We do data poisoning testing. We do, so I think when you get into agentic, then, firms, you're going to have pretty really good controls, really robust controls, not only around the cyber, but around the models. And then internally, there are a lot of different, obviously there's sensitivity of the data and, the parameters that we have now, to deal with in terms of PII and everything. But then what's more important is you have to figure out what your use case is around these and prioritize around that. And then I like to look at the risks around the use case, around the goals. Okay, so you look at your goals, you plot your goals, and then you say what's going to keep us from achieving these goals, and those are your risks. And then you can get into the types of controls that you can use around your risks. And it's not just adverse downside that you're talking about. It's, if your risk is you want to use it for pipeline throughput optimization, you're really talking about increasing throughput, so you're going to be push to a more expansive view of risk and not just the downside hazard view of risk in that case. And I think that's really important around AI.
I just add, Steve, companies should be really careful and thoughtful. There's just everybody's so excited about large language models, but having a view of IP, people really treat patents, that's the mindset, and have a broader conversation around your data strategy. I would say a good place to start is supply chain. because you naturally share information there. You have governance, you have processes, you have agreements. So that'd be a good place to start. But I would be very cautious about putting your crown jewels and exposing that to a large
Mm,
language, right? My
Yes.
previous company, we made a decision that we're going to build an AI factory on-prem with NVIDIA and Dell because we did not want any of that information to ever see a large language model because it gets commoditized. But there's value. So I think, and look, one set of team, the finance team or operations team or IT cannot make those decisions in a vacuum. I think this is a boardroom, you know, business strategy that gets translated into a data strategy. You know, you've heard that data has become the new oil, but look, at the end of the day, if you expose some level of information, you could go out of business. I mean, this is how powerful this capability is. So I'd just be cautious about go fast in places where you already exchange information. Supply chain is a great place to start because of all the things we've talked about, and then really have a disciplined, highly governed approach on strategy. You don't want, people lower levels in the organization, or frankly, others making that decision for you. So it's good, great
great,
question.
great point. Is there another question?
Yes. What approaches are being used to ensure real-time decision-making capability in high-stakes grid or pipeline operations?
I can take that one if you guys want.
Sure.
So actually, yeah, I think the two opportunities that rise to the top, to me at least, in AI are asset integrity and then pipeline throughput optimization. And so if I take both of those, and different people are going to have different opinions about this, but those are probably some of the best use cases that companies are attacking. The asset optimization, you know, there's hundreds of thousands of miles of pipe out there. They're underground. They're getting old. The potential leaking is so you're running around as a pipeline operator. You're running smart pigs through lines that you can. You're measuring wall diameter and thickness, and you get a lot of data out of those things. And then there's a lot of smaller lines that you can't do that. You get into the materials analysis, and you're using corrosion inhibitors, chemicals, and cathodic protection programs and coating on the pipeline. So you're running around. You got these big integrity management programs, and the regulators looking over your shoulder, making certain that you're doing this up to snuff. And it's a lot of data. And so you gather all this data, and then, like I said before, people are looking at it. People are prioritizing. So you get delays, right? Because we're waiting on meetings, we're doing all this. There's a lot of this that could be moving a lot quicker. So you get back to the decision latency, I think. And the longer all this takes to happen, the less lines we're getting control of, the less digs are happening. Money, a lot of money is being spent on digs. If you can use more data, it's generated from smart pigs or other things. And data's in different places too. Sometimes the repair data is in your pods database, and the other stuff's coming from the smart pig, outputs. And so there's a lot of data readiness here. So if you think about how much of this could get pulled in, and the decisions could get made a lot faster, and then exceptions would go to people, but the rest would be automated. I think there's a massive opportunity there to speed all this up. And AI is already being used a lot in this area. We were using it in 2018 or so, with a number of firms. Throughput optimization is another really big one. Just picture, somebody's got 40 pumps, storage, different products are incompatible and can't blend, and you can't manually adjust, like volatile markets, a lot of this. And actually, if you think that autonomously running a pipeline seems like a long ways off, there were pilots in other use cases where it was done, years ago, right? It was called something a little different. It was more robotics, process automation, industrial. But there were some pilots running pipelines autonomously years ago, and the technology and the use and the available options have expanded since then. If you increase the throughput just a couple points, you're talking about significant revenue And there's a lot of manual efforts in taking a pipeline down, bringing it back up, doing a number of those things. And there's a lot of potential for human error, especially when you look at operator fatigue and all this. So it's very realistic to think that a lot of this could run within certain parameters, create a lot of benefits and reduce risk, and then flag the exceptions, and get the people involved when they need to be involved, but optimize it a lot more. Those are the two big ones that I know of. And I think the opportunity exists to take the decisions that are made and reduce it from hours to seconds, and companies that do that, I think, are going to be well ahead of their competitors.
Great point. Gentlemen, we're nearing the end of the hour. I want to pull the ripcord on this and make a wrap here. I want to thank you too, Anup, Al, for joining me today and having an immersive discussion that we've had. AI is here to stay. How it scales and what business benefits are driven from that is up to the people that we've talked about, and how skill sets and talent can be applied, and how AI and automation can become a force multiplier for business. I hope our audience has found it insightful. I certainly did. As I mentioned earlier, any questions that we didn't cover, and I think there were a few in backlog, we'll respond to those afterwards for the benefit of everyone. So look for that. Again, this webinar was recorded as well and will be made available via a link on alignedautomation.com. I appreciate your time today. I hope you all have a great day, and look for us again down the line. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You. Thanks, everybody.
Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Everybody have a safe day. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.